Hi, I'm Robert South, and this is your introduction to Mohism. You're in for fun. We've got a slideshow for you. So here, I'll get it started. That's Mohism, not Maoism. At some point, I will produce material explaining the difference. Mohism was founded by Mozi. Mozi, I'm probably going to pronounce this incorrectly. Professor Inc. lived about 470 to 390 BC in China, the Central States, the most settled part. Mohism was the school that he founded, our movement, political party, religion. It was kind of all melded into one, a philosophy, the Mohists. And he actually had a school where he taught followers who he then sent out. They were his followers, the Mohists. And they were placed in positions in various countries, divided. China was balkanized, and they recruited the leaders to follow a different way, and they were sort of agents of Mozi. This guy here on the left is actually from Yu, and has tattoos. They were different. Most of the Chinese didn't cut their hair, and they didn't, if they were upper class, and they didn't have tattoos. They believed in keeping yourself unaltered. Mo actually means, let's go back. Mo actually means ink, or tattoo, or very dark color. And the school existed from about 450 to, whoa, well, that didn't work out. Yeah, it actually existed during the Warring States period, which was about 450 BC to 220 BC. They carried on for a little while in the early part of the Han Dynasty, but faded away. The book that the followers of Mozi wrote, we don't know that Mozi wrote any of it, and it's riddled with quotations of Mozi, which he wouldn't have written. So if the book says Master Mozi said, and then most of the chapter is a quote, then obviously he didn't write it. So and it was lost for centuries and resurrected in the 1700s. It was found one or two last copies that the Taoists were keeping, because it's mentioned in a Taoist classic, which I won't try to pronounce, as a wrong-headed thing, but they had to explain, this is what that wrong thing was. So they kept it in their library, and that's it. We had a couple of copies of it. The ethics of Mohism is consequentialist. You might have heard of Bentham there. He's a utilitarian, was a utilitarian, early 1800s. Came up with the idea of, it doesn't matter what you do as long as it has good results. That's the main thing. For Bentham, it was utilitarianism, which means the most good for the most many, making people happy or feel good or pleasure, hedonic principle. The idea was simply to make lots of people happy, and Mohism is different from that, which we may or may not get to in this, and eventually will explain. It's not the same kind of consequentialism. Is the larger or overarching class of theory, and utilitarianism is a subset of that class. The epistemology, the science of how you know, the study of how you know what you know, of Mohism is basically pragmatic. Knowledge is that which is useful. That's a gross simplification of pragmatism. That's Charles Sanders Peirce there, wrote some very smart stuff. So in Mohism, there are 3 criteria for presenting arguments. Precedent. Now I've modified this. I've summarized it. I've turned it into ground beef for modern audiences, and I'm calling it Neo-Mohism. It's my extraction of it. So Mozi calls these foundation and basis and all these other things. I'm calling them popularity, precedent, and purpose in whatever order. These are the 3 things that you need to do to present a good argument. Now, we're not talking about presenting certain truth. That's not the idea. We got that from the Western idea of, we're going to determine what is real. That's not, we're determining what a working theory. We're creating a good argument to persuade people of a good course of action or a good basis of action to go forward. It's not the same thing. And a good one has purpose, precedent, and popularity. Predominance of those 3, I've derived it. You'll read some of my stuff that will be on my website, and it explains, I've discovered where Mozi's argument makes arguments based on 2 of the 3 instead of all 3, clearly accepting a predominance, not requiring all 3. And the arguments, the whole Mohist theory built on these 3 epistemological criteria is an interconnected web, and they all support each other. So one portion of it comes up with a conclusion, and the other argument over here about something else relies on that conclusion. It's like a web that all supports each other, and that's fine because it also includes, first of all, there's a whole lot of them supporting each other. It's not just self-referential, and furthermore, it goes into outside evidence. So and besides, popularity is based on the perception of people. Oh, I'll get into the details here. First of all, precedent. That's my modernization. Mozi called it the words and deeds, or some variant. There were 3 chapters that explain this in different ways. The words and deeds of the revered sage kings of China, for him, but of the target culture. In Neo-Mohism, I'm going to say we can have different sages. A different culture may have different sages than these. These were the 4, Yutong, Wen, and Wu. I'm probably pronouncing them wrong. Their tones, and archaic Chinese may not have had tones. So we don't know how Mozi would have pronounced it. The belief is that they use, endings and stuff to make it different glottal stops other than the tones. And Mozi was against music. I don't know, maybe that explains that there was a transition at that time. Kind of digressing here, ain't I? So, there's no script. I figured let prompts, it'll be more naturalistic. These 4 were emperors who had lived hundreds, even thousands of years prior to Mozi, and that was 2,500 years ago, more or less. So a long time ago, and they were legendary. They had, books had been written about them, but they'd been handed down and embellished and over the years. My theory on this is that the winners write the history, and they don't write themselves as villains. But when they write down what they did as great good deeds and what they should, they're reflecting that they understand what they should have done. So it doesn't matter whether these people were great or not. What matters is their intuitive understanding of what they should have been. And the fact that it was carried on for a long time, people understood that and they put it on, and it worked. These principles that they use, so it doesn't matter. The sages provided a background, and our sages, we have created our own sages over history. You don't have to stick with just those. Mozi is a sage for us. We don't really know we can't, if we were to try to do Mohism today, we would not be able to use his sages as our part of our criteria for understanding things, because we don't really know what they said. He quotes them all the time. He quotes books that we don't have. They don't even exist. It wouldn't even be possible, but we have the Mozi. That's what we have. And we can use that as our sages and other sages we may respect in our respective cultures. Fortunately, we can add them. Traditional authority figures from Form 1/3 and tradition can be added to. 46-17 from the Mozi. Kong said, "The noble does not create anything new, but only imitates." Master Mozi replied, "It is not like that. The very ignoble among the people do not imitate the good of the old times, and they don't do the good of the current times either. The less ignoble do not follow the good of antiquity, but they carry out the good that they themselves have, and wish that the good should come from them themselves. Now, if you imitate but do not create yourself, it is not much different than if you don't like to follow, but act on your own initiative. I think that if you imitate the good old ways and also bring the good of our time to execution, you are multiplying the good as wished." So that's one of the justifications for adding new sages. For Mohists, the sages means mainly Mozi. Just as Jesus could not have been a Christian, Mozi could only demonstrate by example how we should regard him. In other words, he was showing us by revering the sage kings, he was modeling what you do to revere your predecessors. He couldn't be his own predecessor to model that for us, but we can revere him as he revered his predecessors. For a Christian arguing in the Mohist style, the sage kings could be Christ. Muslim may quote the Quran. An American arguing about governing in the Mohist style might replace the role of the sage kings with the framers. That's Thomas Jefferson and Adams there, framers. Scientists would quote famous scientists. Scientists don't just sit down in a lab and make stuff up. They have a body of knowledge and theory, and they're going to extend it. They don't just start from scratch. Even though it's empirical and stuff, you start somewhere. You look at the predecessors. All right, the second epistemological criteria, and the presentation I'm doing for a reason, is usefulness and application for the benefit of the world. Mozi was mostly focused on government application, but I think that may be that the Mozi, that book, was for the literate Mohists who were going to go out and work in government. And there may have been a spoken Mohism that was not about that we don't have records of. So what we have here is the consequentialist part. What benefits the three spheres, which I'll get to, is the consequences for the benefit of the world. And it's kind of like science. It's, you're getting results. So you got no knowledge from the predecessors, and then you got getting results. And the third one is the perception of the eyes and ears of the people, or the will of heaven. Now, there are 3 different chapters about this, and one of them is different. And it says, it doesn't have the perceptions of the eyes and ears of the people, the empirical information, double checked by a lot of people, or democracy, whatever other things you want to attribute to this criterion. It has the will of heaven instead, and then immediately goes into talking about the perceptions of the people. I think derived from that, I deduce that means that the will of heaven is known through the eyes and ears of the people. And that checks, because a lot of times we know when the emperor is bad and we need a new emperor because there are storms and lightning and fish falling from the sky. That's how we know. That's how we know. And everybody sees it. And there we go. That's the will of God is known by the people. So that's theocracy. We have theocracy through democracy. We know the will of God through the vision of every person looking at God. Oh, did I forget to mention The theology, Mohism, is theistic. So if you're looking for something atheistic, go to Confucianism or Taoism. You might be happier with that. This is a theistic, I don't know, you might say monotheistic, not really. It's sort of monotheistic, polytheistic, on the cusp there. The basic arguments, okay, I'll summarize what I've got so far. The basic arguments and proposals to base proposals on are the three criteria: sagely tradition, public perception, and good consequences. All right, we got that. Now, heaven is one source of, heaven is known through public perception. So that's an extra criteria, sort of. Now, good consequences don't mean the same thing as for Bentham. It don't mean everybody having a party and getting drunk on beer every day. It means comfort, security, and functionality, never pleasure or potential. Now, we don't want people suffering, but we don't want that pleasure is not a value. There's suffering is to be avoided, but pleasure is not a positive value in itself. It has no value at all. So good consequences just means making sure everyone has all they need in order to do their job and not suffer. And so these are good consequences for who? Is it just for people? It's not. It's for the human world, but also for the spirit world and for heaven. Those are the three spheres. And then now we get to heaven. Heaven, again, is perceived by the people. And the human world, it all connects back to itself. These are the three spheres. They're inside of each other, not next to each other. It's not stack of cannonballs. It's the human world below or inside, the spirit world above. Now, this is through another dimension. The only dimension we have to parallel it to is the surface of the earth, the air above, and then heaven, the universe all beyond. It's probably through another dimension than that. It's not up, it's another way, but that's the metaphor. The human world below, it's the thriving civilization, us. And now this is peculiar because in other concepts of it, like Taoism, they have the world, it's like Christianity. There's the world below with the spirits and demons, and the world above, which is heaven, and in between is us. So the world below for Mozi is earth, is not the netherworld. The spirit world is in between, and the spirits are all mixed up in this world between heaven and earth. And there are all kinds of spirits. I don't think I get into that in this one, but I'll explain it sometime. They're good ones, bad ones. We only see good ones in our world unless we invite them in. Now, you can invite in an evil spirit. There's all kinds, because there are dead people. People die, and some people are evil, and so they're in the spirit world, and so we know that they're nature spirits, they're angels created by God. They're all together. We don't know what's there. But heaven can control what comes into our world and places them here for good purposes. Now, a good purpose might not be nice, good for you if you're a bad person, but it's good. If you see a spirit and you didn't ask for it, then it probably is put here by heaven's will. But if you invite them in, you're getting a random dice roll. You don't know what you're going to get, even though they may pretend. But that's another digression. The spirit world is between here and heaven, and the spirits, it's a complicated part. Heaven is the sky, the universe, everything beyond the spirit world. It's the spirits comprise it and more. So heaven, basically God. Heaven is called Tian, the Chinese word for it. I suspect it's related to the Proto-Indo-European, I'm probably saying this wrong, Deus, which actually became Zeus, and Deus, the Latin word for God. Dea, it's very close. It's for the sky. It's the name of the sky, the daylight sky, that gives us our, grows the plants and gives us the sun and the rain and everything, and a primitive understanding of that which the universe that brings us everything. Heaven's benevolence makes a thriving earth. Okay? And the thriving earth can afford to honor the spirits. The spirits were honored by sacrificing meat, basically, or grain or wine or whatever. Obviously, they don't really benefit from this. It's the thought that counts. But sacrifice was so common throughout the world. Every culture in the world does sacrifice. That'll be in a separate one. But Mozi makes clear that the reason we know it's the same God everywhere is that everywhere people do the similar practices. That is to say, everywhere that people practice animal husbandry, they reach a certain level of technological and social sophistication. Suddenly you have the altar, you have the sacrifice, and the worship of the sky god. We wouldn't consider it sophisticated today. We would consider it pretty crude. Thus, benefiting the spirits heaven cares about. Heaven cares about spirits, earth, and itself. But the way we can best benefit heaven is by sacrificing the spirits, but not directly. Sacrificing the spirits benefits heaven. It's not that burning a lot of meat, obviously heaven gave us the meat. Burning the meat doesn't help heaven. So this is symbolic of the appreciation. So what really matters is to make a thriving earth, and there will be enough people making small token sacrifices of candles made of fat or a stand-in for it, paraffin. And that is enough. That is a token sacrifice. You don't need to kill thousands of horses to get a really big wish. Simply upping the stock market makes more people rich, so there's more people burning candles, and it's more than any of those number of horses can be. It comes down to heaven wanting a thriving earth. You don't need to, the sacrifice bit is just a sidetrack. What heaven wants is a thriving earth. And that's what we worry about. And how does heaven promote that? Heaven promotes it by being a classic eye in the sky. Heaven punishes the bad people who are bad, and it gives good fortune to people who are good. That's simple. In this life, we're not worried about, maybe there's something, we don't know what's happening in the afterlife. You go to the spirit world and who knows? We're not worried about that. What matters is that in this life, now we obviously see a world that's unjust, and there's some material that I will present elsewhere about how obviously there are other factors at play than heaven's reward and punishment, but they're definitely factors. And so you take into account. What do we do to make heaven a thriving, happy by making a thriving earth? It all comes down to one thing. we establish a meritocratic hierarchy. Now, both of those are unpopular these days. And hierarchy is not as simple as Mozi depicts it. He depicts a simple hierarchy to talk to us about it. But we're all involved in many hierarchies of all kinds in different directions. And people that think they aren't don't understand it. And they're all meritocratic. Well, they're supposed to be. And if you don't think that, then you have too narrow a concept of merit. We do it by all helping each other up and down the ladder. You promote people that you consider good by helping them up, helping them rise to power. Various ways: political support, customer patronage, awards, mentoring. And this should be lots of vertical mobility. People should be going up and down all the time. It's not stuck in one place. You're born a noble and you stay a noble, and you burn a peasant, you stay a peasant. It's always going up and down. That's a difference between Mozi and Confucius, for one thing. And others all throughout the world that Confucius would be a stand-in for. Giving the but you have to think about that. You don't have the merit. You have the meritocracy and the upward mobility and downward mobility, but you give people the benefit of their doubt based on their current station, because otherwise the whole thing doesn't work. There is no hierarchy, and there's no point in being meretricious. No, earning merit, because it doesn't get you any power. But you give your superiors the benefit of the doubt. But if you see them doing something that you find is against the rules of their boss, someone even higher, then the rules change, and you don't just defer to them automatically. There's a procedure. First, you remonstrate. It's a special word that there was a lot of stuff written in ancient China about this, but you preferably privately. Mozi didn't want people to, you see if the middle manager sees the company president stealing from the coffers, he doesn't go out on the factory floor and say, "Hey, everybody, let's throw the president out." He goes in and then he talks to the president privately. He says, "You are doing wrong. I'm going to tell the board of trustees if you don't shape up. You need to put that back. You need to change your ways. I'm watching you." You tell them privately, if possible, first. But some people don't have an open door policy. If you have to, you go another way. If you can't get results by giving your errant superior a chance to reform, then you go over the boss's head. You tattle. You say, "Look, boss of the boss, something's wrong here." And there's always a boss. The only entity in the universe that doesn't have a boss is heaven. Heaven is above everyone. Above all human hierarchies, it's the ultimate recourse. Now, you don't just jump to heaven. You go through channels. But here's an extra credit quiz. How do we know what heaven wants? All right. Here's how a Mohist lives personally. And this is totally derived. I kind of deduced all of this from the Mozi and how it must work in order to work at all. There's a 4-stage process. First, all of the principles Mozi puts in there come down to thrift. Using resources and time efficiently. He talks about all kinds of things like how to have funerals and how to not go to war. All these things boil down to not wasting. other than the hierarchical meritocracy and deferring to heaven and so forth, it comes down to this. The first thing you do is you ensure all your subordinates have all they need. People that are under you are that you are taking responsibility for. That includes you. You take care of yourself too. You are one of your tools. Then you ensure your superiors are rendered all their due. And you ensure you have stockpiles. This is repeated over and over. You make sure your family has enough food for 3 years. You make sure if you're the emperor, you make sure the empire has enough food stored for 3 years. At every level of the hierarchy, every leader has to make sure there's enough in the granary to keep everybody alive for 3 years with no new supplies. And that, in modern terms, we can abstract to say, you have to have enough in the bank to keep yourself. So this is what you do with surpluses. First, everybody gets to eat. Then you pay taxes. And finally, you invest. There is no stage 5. You ensure subordinates have all they need, and that includes you. And that means need, not want. It means oatmeal, not chocolate cake, or that's not chocolate, some kind of. But it also means oatmeal, not starving. You're not starving yourself to death. You're not having a party. You're having what you need. Superiors get what they're due. You pay your taxes. You do your job at work. You make your sacrifices to the spirits. You ensure you have stockpiles enough to keep your subordinates for the next 3 years. That could be money, that could be canned goods. And whatever is left over, whatever surplus you have after that, it's a bottomless pit. You invest that in a more secure future to make sure, to enlarge the business, to get a degree, to do whatever, and to discover a new technology. There is no stage 5. You don't go beyond that. You're not saving up for a rainy day. This isn't having your cake later. This is never having cake, ever. And it's kind of unappealing because there's not deferred gratification. It's a way of life. And industry, it's a kind of thrift. It's using your time efficiently. You're supposed to work every day from dawn to dusk, at least, for the 3 spheres. Same with your efforts as with your stuff. The work never ends. There's never any fun. If you're suffering, if you don't get enough to eat, if you don't get enough sleep, if you're living on the street, you can't do your job. But that's all. You go for comfort, not pleasure. Pursuit of pleasure is to be discouraged. You don't go for a massage. Pleasure is wasteful. If you, instead of having a feast, this is famine supplies, give something to Oxfam or whatever. It also, there's other reasons that he gives. He says, it makes you undisciplined. People that are focused on pursuing pleasure, they become addicted to that instead of doing their duty. It becomes a different mindset. It's not just the material costs, it's the psychological effects. And also, I derive that it's supposed to let bad spirits into the world. If you get into a different mind, once that mindset becomes prone to unwittingly saying, come on in. This is a horrible way. How can you work constantly? There's never going to be an end to it. It's not for the purpose. I mean, we're all happy to work all week, to party on the weekend, but we're not willing to work all week and then work all weekend. That's what kind of appeal is that? Well, this is an ideal. Mohism is asks a lot of us, but it's asking for perfection. We are not all going to be perfect sages, and we're not always going to be. That's an ideal. It's something we strive for, and you can get more and more closer to it, and that gives you the right to a higher place in society. We should be led by saints who are really devoted like that, and everybody under them will be ranked according to, you know, how much self-control they have and devotion to the cause. Whereas the other way of thinking about it is it's a discriminator. Either you do all this, you know, here are the rules, and either if you if you're not doing that, then you're no good and you're going to hell. You do break that, you don't, then you're perfect, you're going to hell. It's not like that. There's no cutoff. It's analog, and it's an ideal. You never get there. There's not a cutoff in the middle. It's not a discriminator. The consequence of failure of weakness is inferior status. It doesn't mean you're no good or you're an enemy. It means you're not as good. This guy watched a movie last night. He did, and now look what he's doing. He's sweeping the street. The ideal is to become a sage and practice all this perfectly, at which point you can become an authority unto yourself. Presumably, if you, I mean, you're for perfect, you're criterion one. I would say sages are not unhappy. Sages are not unhappy because there's something called yi, righteousness. It's a complicated thing, and you can read up. The Confucians had pretty much the same idea of it that Mozi had, but he relied on it more. It comes down from heaven, and it actually inspires you and makes you, and it's a form of happiness instead of having the intoxication of listening to music, or which is very similar. Then you have the joy of just knowing that you were righteous and did the right thing. There's a pleasure in meeting the standard and benefiting the world and being in harmony with heaven. To the yi that streams down from heaven that can psychologically sustain you. Once you learn how to do it, presumably you can learn how to do this and get practiced at it if you believe in it, and it will become, you get a taste for it. It's like eating vegetables, as I understand it. They did fall down. The Mohists failed because people were not interested in living that way. Times got good. The wars ended, the famines ended, and like, you know, what do I need you for? But I think the world is at an impasse right now where it's very similar to ancient China, balkanized, no real central authority. Maybe it shouldn't, but, you know, elsewhere I'll address this concept of, you know, one totalitarian. The idea of Mozi was not that there would be one boss and everybody would be clones. The idea was that on fundamentals, moral issues, we're all together. And as you go down the line, you get the details mixed in for different areas, you know, that are more appropriate. So it doesn't have to be all identical. I'm making other stuff. You should check it out. And there's a whole lot more. There's a lot more stuff. So that's it. That's the introduction to Neo-Mohism, because that's my formulation of it. There's a lot of stuff in Mohism, original Mohism, that I didn't touch on. Those are the essentials that would be applied today. And I guess that's it. I'm going to end this and not waste any more videotape.